Hey guys, in this video I wanted to talk a little bit about training variations and how to use them in your off season and just in general from a programming standpoint and my whole approach to them. So I am in my first block post meet, and some of the different movement variations I'm using are going to be the safety bar squat, the pause squat, the large sum press, comp bench, and cold grip bench press, and then conventional and sumo deadlift. And the main reason for programming variations and how I approach them is to address technical deficiencies and improve motor learning. So this is going to be essentially a teaching tool that will reward you for proper movement patterns in different movements, and they will punish you for improper movement patterns. So, for example, here I'm doing pause squats, and this will help you with a few things. So lots of lifters will struggle with a chest fall pattern where their hips will shoot up before their chest will. This will result in sort of a good morning squat and not as good of a joint angle out of the hole. Pause squats will force you to be in that position and really stay, have proper brace in and out of the hole, hit depth better, be a little more comfortable in the hole, etc. That's one of the reasons why I program in pause squats. Um, I'm doing sumo deadlifts and conventional deadlifts because they both complement each other a lot. And coming out of a prep where you're just pushing competition specificity over and over and over again, it does make sense to have some more variation as well to reduce adaptive resistance. And so essentially, this is a concept that we operate on negative feedback loops as humans. The more often that you're doing something, the better your body becomes at adapting to it. And while that is good, from a survival standpoint, in order to continually make progress, we need to strategically make changes or variations in how we are simulating our bodies over time. That's done through differences in average intensity, through repetition ranges, and different exercise selections, different variations. Um, I am also programming in variations to increase adherence and training enjoyment. Like I said, coming out of a competition prep, we were just kind of pushing specificity over and over and over again. It can be a little bit less enjoyable um, training and just doing the same thing over and over again. And so hitting PRs on a pause squat, on a conventional deadlift, on a Larson press, on a safety bar squat, what have you, is going to help increase lifter adherence and enjoyment. There's going to be less monotony of training as well. And it's just cool being able to get new PRs on new movements because you're just doing like the same thing over and over again. It just becomes a little bit harder to make PRs on. You also just can't expect to keep doing like the same things over and over again and get the same adaptive response, like I said, because of that negative feedback loop that we all operate under. So having different exercises, different repetition ranges is just super, super important for long-term training. For example, another reason like for safety bar squats, these are really great because they really do teach you how to brace, have your ribs down, stacked over your pelvis. And I struggle like with the chest fall pattern because I have weaker legs comparative to my quads. So a safety bar squat is essentially this as a forward camber is really going to teach me how to drive up using my back in synergy with my legs instead of just relying on my back time to get out of the hole. This large stem press here helps with oblique awareness, stability, and then also a little bit better thoracic extension in your spine to help push the chest up to the bar. So large stem presses are also really good for that. Variations also can reduce injury risk because you're having different lines of compression and tension on your muscles, joints, ligaments, etc. The more often that this is one of the reasons why you see lots of overuse injuries and perhaps those sorts of like tendinopathies, mild muscle strains, etc., is because you're doing the same thing over and over again as you do approach competition in general to increase specificity and basically increase directed adaptations at the things you're wanting to get good at, which is going to be the competition movements. But that can be overdone, and sometimes even though we have these general principles of specificity should increase over time, avoiding injury is the number one thing that I want to have for my lifters. And sometimes variations like a pause deadlift can really just help potentiate the lifter, just reminding them how to position themselves off the floor, a little bit more of that awareness, and that will help them on their actual primary day when they go into their actual competition movement day. That's something that's very common with sumo deadlifters, having a pause secondary day and then a competition day, because it helps just them improve that position off the floor. And that's so important for a sumo deadlifter. And also, variations also do improve overall hypertrophy. I'm in a off-season mode where I'm kind of trying to add more muscle mass, and so basically having different variations of exercises is going to help you stimulate different areas of your musculature and get a little bit better of a hypertrophy response overall. So it kind of goes hand in hand with each other. And then, like I said, variations can also, depending upon what you respond best to, can also potentiate future progress as competition specificity increases over time. So basically, like I said, you need to progressively change that stimulus to have the best progress, and using variations primarily as a tool for more learning to address any sort of technical deficiency that you do have. Also increasing training enjoyment, adherence, reducing risk of injury, increased training enjoyment because you're doing PRs on new movements. It's just a really, really good way to train and just make training enjoyable, sustainable in the long run. So hopefully this video was helpful. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. I just wanted to just address, this is something I get asked quite frequently about, how do you program in variations of the main movements? Like, what's the purpose of, why do you program in a pause squat as opposed to just a comp squat? Hopefully this gives you some insight. Hey guys, so I wanted to just end off this video with just some really specific practical takeaways on what sort of accessory lift I would program based off of what sort of issues I'm seeing my lifter have on each one of these competition lifts. So let's just first start off with the squat. So the first thing is the most common pattern that I see is a chest fall / hips rising, which is what I usually struggle with. It's usually this is a result of a little bit weaker legs compared to your back, and so you really have to cue that active thoracic spine extension into the bar. So things that can help out with this are pause squats, sticky bar squats, and high bar squats, just because there's going to be an increased demand and more of a demand, essentially, with having to create that thoracic spine extension with each one of these variations. Some coaches do program in front squats. I typically don't program in front squats, usually just because I do find that they result in teaching not the correct breathing patterns and pelvic positioning relative to your ribs, since it's typically because of the front rack position. You have to have your ribs pointed upward, as opposed to how it would be on a back squat, where your ribs are going to need to be down, and just a basic different orientation of your pelvis. So I don't really use those. I usually use any one of these to kind of help with that. This will basically help you. It will teach you a lot more how to do that. Now, if your issue is more so falling out of position on the eccentric, so basically you dive bomb the squat, you lose some sort of tightness, or something happens on the way down, and you're not able to really control that rebound. Tempo squats are really, really good for that. That's what I would usually program. Pause squats could also, if you're having a rebound issue out of the hole, pause squats, but that's also kind of goes hand in hand with the chest fall / hips rising. It's just not being able to control that rebound out of the hole very well. So on bench press, there's a few issues I usually see. So bar path, we're having an inconsistent touch point on your chest. This is going to be usually fixed by a tempo bench. Usually just tempo variations are exaggerated eccentrics are going to force you to slow down and become a little bit more aware of your body's positions over time. And usually I find this is tempo bench is probably my favorite variation for the comp bench. I think it's the number one thing that most lifters get a lot out of. Second thing is going to be instability or lack of confidence pausing at the chest. Usually this is, I'm going to just program in a longer count pause bench press, just to really get that lifter really, really confident with pausing around the chest and what that feels like. If you have problems creating active thoracic extension, which is basically going to be breathing patterns. So basically, as opposed to on the squat and the deadlift, we kind of want our ribs down. On bench press, we want our ribs to kind of be pointed up and expand our thoracic cavity, or spine through breathing in through our chest to kind of puff the barbell up to the barbell. So I'll program in a Larson press, a swivel press, or a tempo bench press on this. Larson press is basically feet up. Larson press is also really good for this oblique awareness, since they do play a role in stability on the bench press. So that's something that I also would program in Larson for. Swivel press is just where you pause about 1 to 2 inches off of the chest. Because you have to pause it a little bit like higher than, you can't just like dump it on your chest. Usually you're going to have to subconsciously bring your chest up to the bar. Tempo bench, again, because you're slowing things down, you're probably going to be able to puff your chest up more towards the bar. Now the last one I see on bench press is just constant leg tension, so not using your legs enough. Basically, you want to have your legs engaged from the moment that you unrack the bar. Usually 2 count and 3 count pause bench help out with that. Split press and tempo bench. Those are usually what I do find. I actually think the Larson press is an overrated variation. I think it can teach like good like shoulder positioning and active thoracic extension and bracing patterns, but that's about it. Like most people just do it because they just see that Sean Noriega doesn't really view as like a hypertrophy sort of movements, which it can be self-limiting. But if you especially have a really big arch, you probably aren't going to be able to get as big of an arch on Larson press because that arch does come from that leg tension. But unless you're like a really extreme archer, I don't think Larson press has a ton of carryover outside of teaching you active thoracic extension and bracing patterns. Also, I guess I could actually add in one more thing. It's going to be like issues with like scapular rhythm. So basically, how you would basically have the relationship between internal and external rotation on the bench press. Larson press can really help out with that, having kind of like an active scapula, because like while you do want to have your shoulders down and depressed and back and whatnot, you do want to have some degree of mobility and active scapula during the entire bench press. And usually if you have a longer range of motion, you're more lanky, that's going to be a little bit more required, and that's what Larson press really does help out with. So if you struggle with like internal external rotation of your scapula, knowing how to kind of move it, that's something that I would recommend also doing. Then deadlift, the main 3 issues I see are problems with hinging, just basic hip hinge. RDLs and SLDLs will help out a lot with that. I will program an RDL if somebody needs to build strength in the flex spine position, whereas I will program an SLDL if somebody needs to build strength in the extended spine position. So essentially, deadlifters are going to either bias towards a flex spine or an extended spine. Just depends upon their strength. So if you're somebody like myself, I bias towards flexion in my deadlift. I'm going to program in an SLDL instead of an RDL because it's going to basically work on my spinal extension more than my flexion. As I have somebody who's a very, very, very strong and extended position on the deadlift, I'm probably going to want to program them more of an RDL. And also just hip hinging. Hips should only move back, and you should be vertical shins. Hips should really only be the thing that's moving, and you want to kind of lower your hips. Now then, poor positioning off the floor and lockup problems go hand in hand. Pause deadlifts are the king of deadlift accessories. It basically makes you more aware of your position off the floor. It also really helps a lot out with your upper back strength. Keeping that really good spinal position, keeping your brace as well. It teaches you how to brace too, how to wedge into the bar, stay in your legs, tying your hips and knees at lockouts. It's just a really, really good variation. I don't really program in block pulls. I don't think they help out really that much because lockout issues are like training the lockout you can't really train a sticking point by training at the sticking point, because you're like a sticking point or an issue where like you miss, it happened because of something earlier on in the chain. It's like basically like you hit traffic because of somebody's like earlier mess up on the freeway or something like that with the navigation. It wasn't like an all of a sudden thing. It was like something happened earlier on in the chain of command that led to that sticking point. There's Greg Michaels has talked about this, but that's essentially like, I don't like sticking point training, like training like at like a spindle press to like improve your mid range that's not really going to help you out. Anyways, that's another video. Upper back strength, I'll program in pause deadlifts, slow eccentric deadlifts, or deficit deadlifts. Unless you're sumo puller, I never program in sumo dead deficits. Those are terrible exercises. You should never use them. But that's essentially what I would program in for a deadlift, slow eccentric, or deficit deadlift if you have issues with upper back strength. Usually that's also going to train your spinal extension. I guess I could also program in SLDL in there. But yeah, I know that in the voiceover I kind of give you like some kind of ambiguous notes. I want to just give you like kind of like my thought process when I see this. And basically, with movement analysis, with form feedback, with clients sending me videos, then I can then address these issues and these deficiencies that I see with variations. And usually this is going to be more applicable to beginner and intermediate lifters who are still learning the movement patterns because they're bad at the movement pattern. Whereas advanced lifters, it's like they're usually pretty proficient, so they're like they won't be doing as many of these. So yeah, essentially, I just want to end out the video with that. Hopefully this helps.